Good morning to everyone. It's good to be here, and I think I'm speaking for all of us. So we decided that we would use the word wealth as a metaphor to talk about reading, because the word wealth indicates to us the amazing lifelong resource that we create when we encourage our children in reading, read with them, and open up doors for them as well as for us in our personal as well as professional lives. So we're going to start with this subtitle called Creating the Wealth. How does one help a child become a good reader and create that amazing wealth? So, Shailja, can we start with you?
Actually, they gave us a perfect segue right before our segment with that, here are 5 books for my children and a selfie for me. I would like to start with that. I don't want to preach to the choir because everybody who's here today clearly believes in the value of reading. But there is a larger culture that we are a part of, which is not really a reading culture, not to my experience. So we encourage our children to read. It's like we are giving them palak to eat, and on our plate there's pizza. So we are sitting there with our thumbs busy on our Facebook and Instagram and all of that, and we're telling them, "Bacha, padho, jaake padho." है ना? So if we want our children to eat a healthy diet, we should perhaps consider modeling a healthy diet ourselves. So that is really like a core message to create a reading culture, both with teachers as well as parents. So when I teach students who plan to become teachers or NGO people working in education, I just pounce on them at times and say, what are you reading right now? Just as she did. And if they don't have an answer, it's like, okay, go pick up something, find something, and start reading. So if you model reading, then you are able to have conversations with your children about their reading. You might share some aspects of what you are reading. You might enjoy browsing bookstores together. There's so many activities that will sort of build upon the very act that we read as a family or read in school.
Yeah, I don't know if she mentioned that I'm a school teacher. That's actually what I've been doing for 25 years. So I'm going to speak from that point of view. So what I have is a group of children with me, and we strike this deal right at the beginning of the year. You will read some books that you want to read and that you like. That's fine. That's absolutely fine. But can you also include in your portfolio, like to continue Zai's metaphor, can you also include in your portfolio a few books that you don't think you would like, but you may fall in love with? Like, can you give it a chance kind of books? So I do that also. And then we tell them, also pick a few, a small, like homeopathic doses of books that you know you won't like, because I think it's good to know why you don't like books. Sometimes I also do this. There'll be things I will not pick up for sure, but then I would like to challenge myself to read it and know why I dislike it, right? It's like know the enemy.
So I actually learned from all these teachers, academics, and of course Zai. So, and I'm a publisher, I'm an author, and for us, I think if we don't have that readership that you all help us build, it kind of becomes all moot in that sense. And so one of the things that I constantly find fascinating, there's this French author called Daniel Penniac who has written this The Rights of a Reader. And it's a fantastic book which goes into how parents and educators can help a child read. And Quentin Blake has kind of condensed it into 10 points. And one of the things is that as the right of a reader, you choose what you want to read. But you also have the right to abandon a book if you don't want to read it. And so I constantly find that one of the most important things for creating that wealth is finding books that children enjoy, giving them access to them, and then letting them read is something I strongly believe in.
So in my notes, I put down digital stuff, but then realized I know practically nothing about it. So, Bijal, do you want to just...
So I think from day one, Zai has been saying, Bijal, you're going to talk about this. I think today, I remember listening to this panel discussion many years ago in Bangalore, and Anshumani Rudra had said something that really startled everybody in the audience. He said that today children are going to grow up surrounded by more screens than books, and all of us were like, what were you talking about? But it's a fact that sometimes, especially where I work at Pratham Books, where we try to get a book in every child's hand, we realize that sometimes a physical copy of a book cannot read. So how do you get there? You create free access to digital books in that case. And for instance, we've created phone stories which you can share on WhatsApp to Anganwadi teachers to use in the classroom. And what I find fascinating in that is because we are apparently one of the constituency that has spammed the world with good morning messages. So I think that digital books, we can spam the world with digital books instead. So that you send a good morning instead, why don't you send a storybook? And I find that that's very powerful. Also, the online world has meant that while many of us continue to support independent bookstores, it also means easy access to buying a book. You can go online and order a book at the tap of your finger. But how do you discover them? So there are groups like Reading Raccoons, which is co-founded by the fantastic Tanushri Singh, where parents and educators as well often come to ask questions saying, my 7-year-old is looking for a certain kind of book. We've started an Instagram handle where you can come for recommendations for genres, for themes, for Indian writers especially. So I think in some ways the online world's created there is a lot of clutter because when you go on Amazon, I'm pretty sure you don't know what to read. But then you have the offline, like you get to festivals, you talk to writers, you go to these online groups on Facebook, on Instagram, and they give you the right cues to say, oh, you're looking for a book about bird watching, then you read Zai Whittaker's Salim Mamu and Me, for instance. If you're looking for a book set in the Northeast, you can read The Very Wiggly Tooth or Karadi Tale's book on the folktale on teeth. So you can find all these books by just conversing, and I feel that's what the online world's done. It's given parents access to the creators, the publishers, and to have a discussion.
I'd just like to add here that reading aloud is so much fun. And when I was teaching in Cody, I used to read aloud a lot to my classes and in the dormitories in the evenings. And then I realized that I was a very bad reading alouder or read alouder. And now I find that there's wonderful read aloud material on YouTube. And that is a huge resource. So I've been going to it and using it to practice my reading aloud skills. And I would really recommend that to the parents. It's good for the children and it's good for us also. It gives us a lot of confidence and it's really a lot of fun. And you hear some of the best speakers and actors, theater people in the world reading aloud. It's really quite a treat.
Can I just add an anecdote here? So we were commissioning these series of Jung Forest books written by Sejal Mehta and illustrated by cartoonist Rohan Chakravarti. And one of the things that videos really freed us with was that we were able to add actual forest sounds. So when you hear a tiger roar, tell me, how does a tiger roar? I'm going to ask you all. Can you tell me? So
You just sound like a bunch of unhappy people.
exactly. It's a very deep-throated growl. It goes, oh, oh. And that gave us a space to actually tell children, to share with children that this is how a tiger sounds. So I do think digital literacy in that sense becomes an exciting space.
Just wanted to add one more point about the reading, books on tape. I'm always thinking about the increasing numbers of children we're becoming aware of who have difficulty reading, genuine difficulty. They should be very much a part of this whole stream of literature and reading to them and having books on tape is the way to go.
Yeah. I'd just like to add one more thing here is that the importance of children reading the original. India is full of abridged and retold editions. They're also much cheaper sometimes, so we like to buy them for that reason. But if you take a book like Wind in the Willows, which was my favorite as a child and remains my all-time favorite book in the whole world. When you read what Kenneth Grahame writes about, for instance, Ratty's house, or the first time that Mole saw the little boat on the river, that's the language that children need to read and hear. So we can't bypass that. And yes, there will be a lot of words. There's a lot of archaic English that I still don't know what those words mean, but I've been guessing away, and I hope I'm right. But just that turn of phrase, the use of the language, is really too important to bypass. So please think about this, that they also need to read the classic books in the original, even if it's sometimes pretty full of stuff or scattered with stuff that they don't understand and you don't understand, but that beautiful language will come through, and that's a very, very important experience. Shall we go on to the third?
Selecting?
So the next wealth metaphor that we came up with, or rather I came up with, and I just made them all agree with me, I think, is called negotiating the market, which means, is this simply a use your common sense kind of area, or are there certain do's and don'ts that we need to be aware of?
Yes. There are plenty of do's and don'ts to be aware of. So I was sharing with them the other day that I grew up in the home of a reader. My father had several thousand books, and he had no do's and don'ts. So he just gave us free access to all his books at whatever age we were at, and whatever levels we were at. He didn't believe in monitoring children. He felt that books plus children equal readers, and that children become good readers. They develop discrimination through experience, through wide and vast experience with books. That was his philosophy a generation ago. Today, as an educator myself, as a parent myself, I disagree with him to a large extent, because in our case, perhaps the collection and selection of books was already rich, and there were already many opportunities to discuss these books. In my experience with other kinds of contexts, I don't feel that giving children random access to books necessarily creates discerning or lifelong readers. For one thing, many children get stuck in certain ruts, certain comfort zones, and often comfort zones of mediocrity. So I don't mean to offend anybody here, but I'm going to say something a little bit offensive.
I really like that.
So Facebook has these trends suddenly, like put up the, some things, the whatever, the artwork you like. And so right now the craze is put up 7 covers of books that mean something to you. So everybody's busy putting up 7 covers of books. And sometimes I look at the 7 covers of books and I can never think of that person in the same way again. And I'm like, this was too much information. I wish you had not shared this with me. I would have been just fine not knowing this. Thank you very much. But that goes to show that there's a certain we just fall into the zone of least resistance as readers if there are not people sort of constantly, sort of at least in the early years, urging us to move on, to experiment, to go beyond comfort zones. And on the other hand, also to sort of caution us about certain kinds of books. I don't believe that all children can read all books at all ages. And that is something that I feel that Kamala has a lot to say about, so I'll hand it to her.
Okay. Well, I wanted to add a couple more don'ts to that list. One is that, sometimes we want our child to read a book to improve their mind. That's generally a don't. I'll tell you why. It's because there are many good reasons why we read books, and there are the same reasons apply to kids too. They read, as you said this morning, no? They read for their own world, to retreat into a world of their own. They read for pleasure, for entertainment. And one of the things that we may make a mistake doing is to expose them to books about children in very different circumstances than their own, which is a good thing. I'm sorry, that's not a mistake. But the way we deal with it and the way we talk about the book with the child later is very important, because for many of our kids, the milieu they come from, guilt is a very easy thing that they start to feel. So we have to be careful when we're trying to drive moral lessons to them about life and how they are. They are who they are. They were born into this, and it's not their fault. So when we're introducing other worlds to them, just to keep that in mind. And another don't that I had was, suppose your child or children are enjoying a book that you think is weakly written, like it's not very good writing, not a good plot. We have many examples of that, I won't say. But you have to be very tactful about it. I know that as a child, I felt very hurt when my dad would say, "Why do you like that music? That's not good at all." But some other adult would, gently say, yeah, maybe I don't like that anymore, but I used to. There has to be even their dialogue. And maybe here's a good time for us to talk about how do we dialogue with kids about the books that they are reading, recommended by us or not.
Before talking about how to dialogue, I think we should have a shared understanding of why it is important to dialogue. Why can't I just read a book and just put it down and go on to the next book? Why on earth do I need to sit and discuss it with somebody else? So the way I like to think about it is that I'm only capable of understanding one perspective and to reach a certain level of understanding about a book or an issue. Right now, we are all dialoguing and discussing an issue here. Together, when we discuss, we get to sort of share our perspectives, we get to listen to each other and stretch our own thinking about it. I may agree or disagree with them, but it gives me opportunities to consider what they are saying, to reflect on it, and thus to grow. Sometimes we are on the border of understanding something and somebody articulates it just the way, and we'll be nodding, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. So a dialogue provides that shared space where you can sort of stretch your understanding and arrive at understandings that are not individually your own. So it's extremely important to have spaces to dialogue. Now, in terms of how to dialogue, I think especially since I'm addressing not just parents but also teachers, teachers especially tend to dialogue in very didactic ways that aim at, have you understood the story? Comprehension is the goal of dialogue. Whereas I'm arguing that the reason we bring literature to children is not so that they understand the story, but to open up avenues for them to interpret and respond to the story. So we need to move in our conversations with children from arriving at understanding the story to interpreting and responding to the story. So I was just giving them an example of a student of mine who recently went for 6 weeks to West Bengal, and she went and taught in a small school there. And she used real Bengali literature because she was teaching children in Bengali. And there's this story by Leela Mazumdar where a little boy goes and steals an egg from a bird's nest. And he comes back and he's beset with anxiety about the fact that he has stolen something. And then there's a point in the story when he wakes up and sits up in bed and he sees all the birds sitting at the foot of his bed saying, "And why have you stolen the egg from us? Do you intend to boil and eat our egg?" At that moment, she opened it up for interpretation, and she got extremely rich and vivid responses. So some children felt that the birds had really come and really said that. Other children felt that no, it was his anxiety and his guilt playing, and they didn't really come. So there were multiple avenues for exploration, and through that you get into the idea of the fact that authors may be more subtle than you imagine them to be. It may not be understanding the plot. There are hidden messages and subtle techniques that they use to open up the world for us to consider. And lots of rich experiences came up. Another thing I do want to say briefly is that children also respond very powerfully to literature. So literature is a great place to explore emotions and emotionality. For example, if there's a moment of grief or loss, or bullying. It need not be anything as extreme as grief. It could be even a story about bullying, and children have so much going on right there that they could respond to. So when you dialogue with children, keep interpretation and response at the center more than just literal meaning making. Comprehension, sorry.
That's definitely one of my less nice school memories, is constantly being told by the teacher, but you haven't understood this story. But I understood it in this way, but nobody wanted to know that. So talking about dialogue, can we just open it up to you? Oh, 5 minutes it says, okay. Would anyone like to contribute something to this dialogue? I think we've thrown out some pretty provocative and rude comments that you might like to respond to.
So I feel that children today probably seem to have more of a mind of their own than probably our generation had. And from a lot of friends, I don't have children, but from a lot of friends who have children, often they say that, it's very hard to recommend today to a child a particular book or. So I was just wondering, if it's a generation which largely likes to make choices on its own, any thoughts on sort of still, where is that middle ground where you still are able to suggest and...
It's on? Yeah. No, yeah, so this is exactly what I was referring to. As a teacher, I would make, it's really an agreement, a cooperative agreement I make with the children at the beginning of the year. I also promise to read a book recommended by each of them through the year, which I do. I gamely read all their favorite books. And then I say, so will you do this? Will you pick something that you don't think you might like? And will you pick something that you feel maybe you might fall in love with? I think it has to be a cooperative, it's a playful thing actually. And it's not coming from an anxious space in the adult. If I'm anxious, which as a parent I might be, as a teacher I'm not, I'm much more relaxed. As a parent I might be like, oh my God, you have to read this and you shouldn't be reading that. So that anxiety maybe distorts the way we negotiate with them.
I'm also persistent with my children. Mother's recommendations are a no-no generally, but I'm kind of persistent as in I keep, okay, so if they don't read that book, the next week another set of books comes, and it's always lying around. So there are recommendations around, and once in a while my 15-year-old will come and say, I'm out of books, do you have a recommendation? And that's the golden moment that I see.
And sometimes saying the opposite of what you want them to do also works, right?
So my mother has assured me.
Don't read this.
Also, I think I'm neither a parent or a teacher, but I'm a very cool aunt. And I take my nephew book shopping, and I took him last time to Kahani Tree in Bombay. And I said, you can buy X number of books of your choice, and Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls are just released. And I said, you have to buy this. And he said, but you said my choice. And this is for girls. So I said, okay, you can buy X plus one, but you have to buy this. But then we went back and we read that book together. And then he finished it, and then he later wrote to me saying, Masi, I really enjoyed that book. It has some very cool art as well. So I think it's what Shailaja and Kamala were saying. It's about dialoguing with that child.
It's an interesting observation. Over the last 2 days, I've noticed that the authors and publishers are suggesting that we should not control what the kids should read. And interestingly, practitioners, especially with an educational background, where teachers are suggesting, hey, maybe parents need to have some sort of a do's and don'ts framework. Now, I'm looking at this from a parent standpoint. Like, there is a very interesting mix of thoughts, strong justification. In fact, I think one of the kids yesterday mentioned, I normally don't go by what my parents suggest as the things that I should read. So, leading from her question, is there a generation gap and stakeholder objectives that we have to tackle with in deciding what is the right way forward, right?
Answer that. Oh. Well, I think it's good to have a mix of opinions, I think, and I think finally at the end of the day, it's about common sense and knowing your child, really.
It's not just a generation gap as much as a perspectives. We are coming at it from different sets of experiences. So that could be why the opinions are different.
So thank you very much. I think we're out of time.